Humanity had always tried to fit into the galaxy. When they first arrived among the stars, the Council of Elder Races looked at them the way one looks at noisy children. They were curious, eager, and reckless. They built ships too fast, expanded too quickly, and talked too loudly. The Council tolerated them, but only just. Humans were given a seat at the far end of the chamber, away from the core worlds. They were permitted to trade, but always at unfair rates. They were allowed to colonize, but only on barren rocks that no one else wanted. In every way that mattered, humanity was treated not as equals, but as intruders. And yet, humanity endured. They worked harder, pushed further, and carried on with quiet determination. Even when their ambassadors were mocked, they smiled. Even when their fleets were forced into service as auxiliaries, they obeyed. Even when their colonies were taxed into poverty, they paid. Humanity had always believed that patience would earn respect, that by proving their worth, the galaxy would finally accept them. But patience has limits. On the mining world of Sigros 4, that limit was reached. Sigros 4 was not a rich planet. Its skies were gray, its seas shallow, its soil barren. But beneath its crust lay veins of rare metals. Metals that Earth needed to build starships, to keep colonies alive, to trade for survival. 30,000 men, women, and children called it home. They had worked the land with bleeding hands, shaping barren dust into farms and shelters. It was not paradise, but it was theirs. Until the day the guild arrived. The Zareth Trade Guild was powerful, wealthy, and cruel. Backed by the Council, they claimed ownership of entire systems as easily as a banker signing a slip of paper. To them, Sigros 4 was not a home, it was a resource. Their ships came without warning. Soldiers in shining armor marched through human streets. They read out a declaration in a language most colonists didn't understand. Then they began requisitioning. Families were dragged from homes their grandparents had built. Workers were beaten when they tried to resist. Children cried as strangers took what little food remained. The guild called it necessary redistribution. The humans called it theft. And when protests rose, when desperate colonists gathered in the square to plead for justice, the guild gave its answer: gunfire. By the time the smoke cleared, thousands lay dead. The streets of the colony ran red with blood. Homes burned, crops were trampled, and silence fell over the ruins. 30,000. Voices were silenced, reduced to ash and memory. When the news reached Earth, it did not come as words on a page. It came as screams through emergency transmissions. It came as grainy recordings of armored soldiers firing into crowds. It came as the broken voice of a child whispering, "Please, help us." Before the signal cut to static, there was no help. Only silence. The Council called it a tragic misunderstanding. The Guild called it a necessary act. They promised to investigate, to compensate, to review procedures. But there was no apology, no justice, no shame. For the first time in centuries, humanity did not bow its head. Across the colonies, across Earth, Mars, Luna, Titan, and beyond, the story spread like fire in dry grass. People watched the recordings, listened to the screams, and something inside them broke. For generations, humanity had endured humiliation, exploitation, and scorn. But now, in the ashes of Sigros 4, they found something stronger than patience. They found rage. Mothers who had buried children clenched their fists. Soldiers who had fought under alien command turned their eyes homeward. Workers in dusty factories raised their heads with new determination. The grief was deep, but deeper still was the fury. And so a promise began to form, whispered first in homes, then shouted in streets, then broadcast from every colony across the stars. No more. Sigros 4 would not be forgotten. Humanity would not be ignored. They had pushed too far, and now, for the first time, the galaxy would learn what it meant when humanity finally pushed back. The death of Sigros 4 did not fade into history. It became a wound that refused to heal. On Earth, people gathered in streets holding candles and pictures of loved ones who would never come home. On Mars, miners who worked the iron pits laid down their tools, not in protest, but in mourning. On Luna, the great domes went silent as every broadcast replayed the last transmissions of the colony, voices begging for help that never came. For a while, grief weighed heavier than anger. Humanity was vast but scattered, and the galaxy was cruel. Who could they turn to for justice when the very council that ruled the stars had already chosen to look away? But then something changed. On a quiet evening in the orbital city of New Geneva, an old admiral gave a speech that would echo across every colony. He was not young anymore, his hair gray, his body tired from years of service under alien command. Yet his voice was sharp, carrying the strength of truth. Patience has given us nothing, he said, standing before the crowd. Respect has been denied to us. Justice has been stolen from us. They think humanity will endure forever, bowed and silent. But I say to you now, we will endure, yes, but not in silence, not anymore. His words spread like wildfire. People began to whisper a single phrase, no more. On Mars, engineers began working around the clock, pulling old warships from the dusty storage docks. These were relics from humanity's wars with itself, rusting carriers, forgotten destroyers. But with new metal and new hands, they came alive again. On Titan, the shipyards roared with activity. Workers who had once built freighters and haulers now forged warships, plating them with thick armor, arming them with railguns and torpedoes. The workers sang as they built, their voices carrying across the vast halls of steel. Not songs of joy, but songs of promise. On Earth, factories turned from commerce to war. Assembly lines that once produced tractors now produced missile launchers. Civilian shuttles were stripped and reinforced. Every hand, every tool, every mind was given to one cause: prepare. Even children joined in their way, painting banners, carrying messages, and whispering to one another stories of heroes not yet born. Humanity was not only gathering weapons, it was gathering will, and with every day the anger grew sharper. Families who had lost loved ones demanded action. Soldiers who had once been commanded by alien captains spoke of betrayal, of fighting for those who had laughed while Sigros 4 burned. Farmers, teachers, scientists, all of them understood now. The galaxy would never respect them until humanity forced it to. There was fear, of course. The council was vast, its fleets larger and older than anything humanity could build. To many, the thought of war was madness, but grief and fury burned away fear. A miner from Mars summed it up best when he was asked by a journalist if humanity could win. He looked into the camera, his face hard and scarred from years underground, and said, "We are not fighting to win. We are fighting so they can never forget us. We are fighting because if we do nothing, then Sigros 4 dies for nothing. We fight because it's all we have left." His words struck deep. Ships began gathering in secret rendezvous points. Small fleets at first, scattered and weak. But every week, more arrived. Old freighters refitted with cannons, tiny patrol craft carrying missiles on their hulls. And then came the heavier ships, the reborn destroyers, the resurrected carriers, the cruisers patched together from scrap and steel. The United Terran Fleet was being born, not by government decree, but by the will of the people. And at its heart was a promise, carved into every hull, whispered into every oath. They pushed us too far. Now we push back. The galaxy did not notice at first. The council dismissed the activity as restless behavior, a phase that would soon pass. The elder races laughed at the thought of humans building a fleet to stand against them. But among the stars, in hidden shipyards and secret bases, the storm was gathering. A storm made not of plasma or politics, but of fire and steel, of grief and fury. And when it finally broke, the galaxy would know that humanity's patience had ended. The retribution had begun to breathe. The galaxy had laughed at the idea of human vengeance. To them, Earth was still a small world at the edge of the stars, the Council's fleets numbered in the thousands, while humanity's counted only in the hundreds. What harm could a few noisy primates do against civilizations that had ruled space for millennia? They found out on the day the Terran strike group arrived at Sigros 4. For months, the United Terran Fleet had been quietly gathering, hiding in the shadows of gas giants moving through forgotten trade routes, cloaking their numbers behind silence. Now one task force, just 20 ships, was chosen to deliver humanity's first answer to the massacre. The order was simple: reclaim Sigros 4 or burn those who stole it. The fleet jumped into orbit without warning. Against the gray surface of the planet, guild ships hung like fat spiders over a web of plundered mines. Cargo vessels were loaded with stolen metals. Armed escorts patrolled lazily, confident that no one would dare challenge them. They were wrong. The humans hailed them once, their signal broadcast in every tongue of the Council so there would be no mistake. This is the United Terran Fleet. You are guilty of murder. Surrender immediately, or be destroyed. The guild commander laughed. His voice echoed across channels, mocking arrogant. Humans, he sneered. You think yourselves soldiers? You are insects buzzing in the void. We will swat you aside. The laughter ended when the Terran guns opened fire. Railguns cracked like thunder. Missiles streaked across the black, leaving white trails of vengeance. Kinetic slugs slammed into alien hulls with unstoppable force. Where plasma shields shimmered, they shattered under the brutal, simple power of mass-driven rounds. Within minutes, the first guild ship was torn in half. Another's engines exploded, turning the void into a burning grave. The escorts scattered, firing wildly. But the Terran fleet moved with a unity the aliens had never seen. Ships fighting not as scattered units, but as one living force. Every human pilot, every engineer, every captain carried the memory of Sigros 4 in their hearts. They did not fight for glory, they did not fight for conquest. They fought for the voices that had cried for help and been left to die. One Terran frigate, the Dauntless, was struck by heavy fire. Flames spread through her decks, her hull splitting open. Yet instead of retreating, she accelerated, slamming her railguns into one last barrage that destroyed 2 alien cruisers before she finally went silent. Her crew's last transmission was a single word: justice. The battle was short, but it was not silent. By the time it ended, 20 human ships floated scarred but alive, while the guild fleet was nothing but wreckage and burning debris. Cargo vessels full of stolen ore were seized, their crews captured. Sigros 4 was free. Though it stood empty, its people gone, its homes ruined. The Terran admiral gave the order to broadcast the victory to every system within range. Not as a threat, not as a boast, but as truth. The message was simple, spoken in a calm, steady voice. We remember Sigros 4. Humanity will not forgive. Humanity will not forget. The galaxy trembled. For the first time, the elder races saw what human rage looked like when given steel and fire. This was no rebellion that could be crushed in silence. This was no riot to be ignored. Humanity had struck a blow. And it had struck deep. In the council chambers, arguments erupted. Some demanded punishment, others demanded caution, but none could deny what had happened. A single Terran strike group had wiped out a guild fleet. And if 20 ships could do this, what could 200 do? What could 1,000? Among the small and weak species, whispers began to spread. Races, long ignored and exploited, leaned closer to their screens, watching the footage of human ships blazing through the void. They saw the strength, the fury, and most of all, the defiance. For centuries, they had been silent under the council's boot. Now, for the first time, they felt something stirring in their hearts. Hope. Humanity had taken its first step into retribution, and the galaxy understood. This was only the beginning. The news of Sigros 4's liberation spread faster than light. Within hours, every star system carried the same story. Humans had destroyed a guild fleet. 20 Terran ships had stood against the arrogance of the Council's allies and won. At first, disbelief. The elder races shook their heads. Impossible, they said. Humans were too young, too weak, too undisciplined. This must have been an accident, a fluke of luck, a guild commander too foolish to fight properly. But then the recordings arrived. Footage from the battle showed Terran ships moving in perfect unity, railguns firing with relentless precision, missiles tearing through shields that had been thought impenetrable. It was not luck. It was not chance. It was fury forged into steel. In the great halls of the Galactic Council, chaos erupted. Ambassadors shouted across the chamber, their voices echoing against the vaulted ceilings. Some demanded an immediate strike against Earth, a punishment so brutal it would crush human spirit forever. Others warned that such action might only feed the fire. The council chair, an ancient being whose kind had ruled since before Earth discovered fire, struck the ground with its staff. "These humans must be reminded of their place," it declared, voice cold as ice. "They are not equals, they are not allies. They are subjects who must be corrected." So the council moved to act. Sanctions were declared. Trade routes to human colonies were blocked. Supplies of medicine, food, and fuel were cut off. Alien fleets patrolled human borders, seizing any vessel they deemed suspicious. They thought that by choking humanity's lifelines, the fire would smother before it spread. But the fire only grew. On Earth, shortages brought people together instead of tearing them apart. Neighbors shared what they had. Factories doubled their efforts. Farmers worked night and day to feed not only their own families but entire towns. On Mars, miners dug deeper, extracting resources that had once been too costly, now given freely to the cause. On Titan, shipyards roared louder, building faster, stronger, bigger. The Council had wanted to break human unity. Instead, it gave humanity one banner, one purpose, one enemy. Meanwhile, in the shadows of forgotten worlds, others watched. Small civilizations that had always lived under the Council's heel. Worlds stripped for resources, peoples silenced and ignored, looked to humanity with wide eyes. For the first time, they saw a race that dared to defy the giants. On the trade world of Valeth, a merchant whispered to another, "If the humans can fight them, maybe we can too." On the refugee colonies of the Rim, children painted Terran, ships in the skies above their shelters, calling them protectors. The oppressed found something they had not known in generations: hope. The Council, blind in its arrogance, did not see this. It sent envoys to warn humanity, to demand surrender. The Terran ambassadors listened in silence, their faces carved from stone. When asked if Earth would yield, the lead ambassador gave a single answer: "We remember Sigros 4. And with those words, the chamber fell silent. The Council could not understand it. To them, war was politics, a tool for bargaining. To humans, this was not politics. It was personal. Every colony lost, every family broken, every name carved into the dust of Kigros 4 was a weight on their hearts, and they would carry that weight into battle. The Council prepared its fleets. Hundreds of ships gathered at staging points, armed and ready to descend on Terran space. They believed that with overwhelming numbers, they could end the rebellion before it spread. But humanity was no longer the weak child in the corner of the chamber. They had been underestimated too many times. While the Council prepared for war, the United Terran Fleet prepared for survival. Hidden shipyards and asteroid belts churned out vessels in secret. Weapons factories on Mars ran without pause, their furnaces glowing day and night. Engineers whispered of new tactics, new weapons, new ways to strike at enemies who thought themselves untouchable. The galaxy was changing. The Council believed it still held power. The elder races still laughed at the idea of humans as equals. Yet beyond their sight the storm gathered. And soon, when the fleets of the Council came, they would discover the truth too late. Humanity was not just enduring anymore. Humanity was preparing. The first strike at Sigros 4 had shocked the galaxy. The Council's sanctions had only hardened human resolve. Now came the true test: war. The Council believed its fleets would crush humanity in weeks. Their admirals boasted in grand halls, promising that Earth would kneel before the month was over. They spoke of teaching the primates a lesson and restoring order. They believed their thousands of warships, perfected through centuries of dominance, could not fail. They did not understand what they were facing. When the first HFY Council fleet crossed into Terran space, humanity was ready. Scouts had tracked every move, every hyperspace jump, every patrol. The Council expected to find fear. They found defiance. The Battle of Acheron was humanity's answer. 3 Terran carriers, old and scarred, met a fleet 3 times their size in the frozen rings of the gas giant. Council ships opened fire, plasma lances burning through ice and stone. But the humans did not scatter. They used the rings themselves as cover, weaving through fields of ice, striking from shadows. Railgun slugs turned chunks of frozen rock into deadly shrapnel, tearing through alien hulls. One by one, the carriers fell, their crews refusing to abandon position. The last transmission from the Valiant came as her engines burned and her hull split apart. For Cygros 4, for Earth, hold the line. When the battle ended, the Terran fleet was gone, but the Council had lost twice as many ships. The world called it a defeat. Humanity called it a promise. The war spread across the stars. At the Halcyon Gate, a narrow passage between systems, 3 human destroyers stood against 30 alien cruisers. They fought until their hulls cracked open and their crews suffocated in silence. But they held long enough for transports full of refugees to escape. Their sacrifice turned Halcyon Gate into a graveyard of steel, a warning to the galaxy. Terrans did not retreat. On the colony of Meridian, civilians armed with rifles and improvised bombs resisted an entire occupation force. Farmers, teachers, and mechanics fought in the streets, turning every building into a fortress. The Council called them terrorists. Humanity called them defenders. Everywhere the same pattern repeated. The Council had numbers. Humanity had will. For every Terran city bombarded, a Council fleet was ambushed in return. For every human life lost, 10 enemies paid the price. Humanity could not match the galaxy, ship for ship. But they fought with something the Council had long forgotten: desperation. Alien fleets relied on doctrine, rigid formations, predictable strategies. Human captains broke every rule. They attacked supply convoys instead of warships. They used civilian freighters as decoys. They turned mining lasers into weapons, asteroids into traps, even used their own wreckage to mask missiles. And in every battle, the voices of Cygros 4 seemed to echo in their minds. They were not fighting for conquest. They were fighting to be remembered, to make sure that no colony ever burned in silence again. The galaxy watched in awe. For the small and powerless races, humanity became a story told in whispers. The Terrans fight like no one else, they said. They bleed, but they do not bow. But war has a cost. On Mars, the shipyards filled with broken hulls, wounded crews, and grieving families. On Earth, children grew up too fast, their laughter replaced with ration, lines and air raid drills. Messages from the front often came as silence, names written in black lists instead of letters. Yet even in sorrow, the fire did not fade. The more humanity lost, the harder they fought. Their pain became their strength. Their grief became their shield, their rage became their weapon, and slowly, battle by battle, system by system, the Council began to bleed. Its fleets no longer moved with arrogance but with caution. Its commanders spoke less of lessons and more of containment. The Terrans had done the unthinkable. They had turned fear against the mighty. It was not victory yet, but for the first time the Council felt what humanity had carried since Cygros 4, the weight of fear. And they knew. The war of retribution had truly begun. The war had dragged on for years. Humanity had lost much. Cities turned to ash, colonies shattered, fleets broken. But the Council had lost more. Every battle that was meant to crush the Terrans had instead left scars on their pride. The upstart primates were no longer an annoyance. They were a threat. And so the Council prepared its final answer. From across the galaxy, fleets gathered, 200 ships strong, the largest coalition armada ever assembled. Cruisers, dreadnoughts, carriers, and swarms of escorts darkened the void as they converged on a single point, Orion's Reach, the gateway to Earth. The message was clear. This was not just war, this was extermination. But humanity was waiting. Hidden in the shadows of Saturn's rings, behind asteroids and moons, lay the largest Terran armada ever forged. 1,000 ships, battleships built in Titan's forges, carriers armed with swarms of strike craft, destroyers and frigates painted in the black of the void. Every ship bore scars, every crew carried grief, but together they were a storm unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. When the Council Armada entered Orion's reach, humanity unleashed its answer. The void lit up. Terran missiles streaked forward like burning stars. Railguns cracked like thunder, their slugs punching through shields as if they were paper. Council ships returned fire, plasma lances scorching through armor, fighters swarming in deadly waves. The blackness of space became a sea of flame and wreckage. The battle was chaos, but in chaos, humans thrived. While the Council relied on rigid formations, humanity broke every rule. Squadrons split, regrouped, vanished, and struck from impossible angles. Civilian freighters disguised as helpless targets revealed hidden weapons and tore through unsuspecting cruisers. Mining ships converted into war machines, rammed into dreadnoughts with suicidal fury. At the heart of the battle, the Terran flagship Resolute led the charge. Her admiral, a woman who had buried her husband and son on Seagros 4, gave no speeches, only orders. Her eyes burned with a quiet fire as she whispered to herself, "This is for them." The fight raged for hours. Space was filled with the wreckage of burning hulks, screams echoing through broken channels. Ships on both sides died, bravely their crews vanishing into silence. But humanity did not break. Even when engines failed, even when hulls cracked, the Terrans fought to the last. The Council had expected fear. What they found was fury without end. At the battle's peak, when the Council thought victory within reach, the Terrans revealed their final weapon. From the dark edges of the system, hidden for months, came the orbital spear, an array of railgun platforms built in secret. With one command, they opened fire, unleashing kinetic hell. Slugs the size of buildings screamed across space, tearing dreadnoughts apart in single shots. The tide turned, Council ships began to falter, cruisers fell back, escorts scattered, carriers tried to flee. But humanity gave no escape. The Terran fleet pressed forward, relentless, merciless, carrying with them the memory of Seagros 4, Halcyon, Acheron, and every graveyard left in the void. When the dust cleared, Orion's reach was silent. The Council's armada, its pride, its power, its symbol of domination, was gone. Wreckage floated in endless fields of fire and broken steel. The Terran fleet, bloodied and battered, still stood. It was not an easy victory. Thousands of human lives had been lost, entire ships, entire families gone. But they had endured. They had prevailed. And across the galaxy, every race, every world, every soul heard the truth. The Council could be defeated. For the first time, the mighty had fallen. For the first time, the galaxy looked upon Earth not with laughter, not with scorn, but with fear. The turning point had come. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival. Now they were fighting for destiny. Orion's reach was a graveyard. For weeks, wreckage drifted in the void. Shattered hulks of ships, broken engines, and frozen bodies tumbling silently through the black. Fires still burned inside cracked hulls, oxygen leaking into the cold. The battle had ended, but its scars would last forever. Humanity had won, but the victory tasted of ash. On Earth, bells rang to honor the fallen. On Mars, miners lit torches and placed them in the shafts, glowing like stars underground. On Titan, the shipyards fell silent for the first time in years, every worker gathering to read the names of those who had not returned. The list seemed endless: fathers, mothers, children, whole families who had left together and never came back. And yet, behind the grief, there was something else. Pride. For the first time in history, humanity had faced the Council's full strength and survived. Not only survived, they had prevailed. The Council's mighty armada, the weapon of fear that had kept the galaxy in chains for centuries, lay broken at Orion's reach. The legend of invincibility was gone. In the Council chambers, silence ruled. The once proud delegates no longer shouted. Their fleets were ruined, their authority shaken. They had underestimated humanity, mocked them, crushed them, and now they feared them. For the smaller races of the galaxy, the story was different. On forgotten worlds, in colonies stripped for resources, in stations where children had grown up under the shadow of alien boots, whispers turned into songs. Stories of the Terrans spread like fire, the people who bled, the people who fought, the people who did not bow. They called them many names, defenders, rebels, saviors. But one name echoed louder than all others: retribution. Because humanity had not sought conquest, they had not sought empire, they had sought justice. And when it was denied, they had forged justice with their own hands, in fire and blood. The galaxy would never forget the words broadcast from Earth after the battle. The Terran Council, formed of leaders from every colony and every surviving fleet, spoke not as conquerors but as survivors. Their message was short, clear, and carried to every corner of the stars. We remember Sigros 4, we will never bow again. To those who live in fear, know this: humanity stands. To those who would break us, know this: humanity endures. To those who hope for freedom, know this: humanity rises. The words shook the stars. For the oppressed, it was a beacon. For the Council, it was a warning. For humanity, it was a promise. But promises come with a price. Even as victory songs were sung, Earth knew the cost had been terrible. Millions dead, colonies scarred, a generation lost to the void. Families broken forever. No one celebrated without tears. Still, grief did not crush them. It bound them tighter. Humanity's strength was not in its weapons, but in its memory. Every grave, every name, every face lost in the fire became a thread in the fabric of their will. The war was not over. The galaxy still trembled. But from that day, no one looked at humanity as weak. No one dared call them children. No one dismissed their voice, because the Terrans had proven a truth written in blood across the stars. Patience has limits. Mercy has limits. But when humanity is pushed too far, when the line is crossed, when the innocent are burned, when the cries go unanswered, something awakens, something unstoppable. And so the story of Sigros 4 lived on, not as a tragedy, but as the spark that lit a fire across the galaxy. Generations later, children on distant worlds would look up at the night sky and whisper the same words that once rose from the ashes of grief. Thank God for humanity.